Mm.
Are you all ready to join me today in our trip to outer space?
Come along quietly or not.
I will talk to you of art. For there is nothing else. Some artist made a hook.
Yes.
Let you bite upon it.
Classy. And now, without further ado,
Nice mic's like a professional studio.
Yeah, but you could if you
Summertime and the living's easy. Fish are jumping and the cotton is high. You know your daddy's rich and your mama's good looking. So hush, little baby, mama, don't you cry. Yeah.
All right, folks, welcome now to the Planet Shivers podcast. I am, and always will be, Albert Shivers, and I am very excited today to finally be joined by my favorite rabbi, the rabbi, Rabbi B.B. Melman. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Al, for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm just going to scooch this over.
And I brought Smiley with me, my
Yes.
canine cohort. We never leave home without each other. So
And he is a husky.
Siberian
Siberian.
from the Gulag.
Yeah, like I said before, it's my first canine guest, which is exciting. It's good to have one for a little
If
while.
you hear any heavy panting, that's not me. He's 14, so he's very. He breathes loudly.
Gotcha. No, but he's amazing.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
Very gentle
Yeah.
and kind.
So, I guess we could start, Rabbi, with where you're from.
I am currently from Stroudsburg, and let's see. Well, it's a long story. I could claim Brooklyn because that's where the hospital was. Bethel or Brookdale, it goes by various names. And I lived there for about a week. And then I was spirited out to Long Island, Rockville Center,
Okay.
which is the archdiocese. And I called it Rockville Yenta. And I didn't know any different. I mean, that's just what I called it. But people laughed when I said it, so I kept saying it. So
Yeah.
got good laughs.
If it gets a laugh.
I'm just going to keep repeating
Yeah.
it. I was so cute. They used to toss me around. And I'm like a midget toss. Oh, you're not allowed to say that these days. But a small person.
It's okay on the podcast.
Okay, so I have cousins who are like a quarter century older than me, and I was the baby, and so I had no choice in the matter. It was, I didn't choose to be born. I didn't choose to be the youngest of all the cousins, and
Right.
it's just the way it was. So, and then when I was 7, we moved out to Rochester, New York, and where my dad got a position, electronic engineer at Xerox, vice president, and he developed the first fax machine. He's head of that team. And then 68, the fax machine came out, but nobody was aware of a fax machine in 1968 because the Xerox, the heads of the company, they took a survey and they decided that people would never use fax. They're just going to go with courier services.
Okay.
And so they sidelined it, and he was very discouraged. So he moved on, and we moved to the Boston area, Lexington, and near Route 128 in the high tech. And my dad became a consultant to high tech industry. And before I was even born, he was he was chief engineer at CBS. So we had the first. We had the first color TV. So my brothers, I wasn't born yet, as I said, but all their friends came into the living room to watch Wizard of Oz in color.
Wow.
And that was fantastic.
And if I remember correctly, your father had something to do with the invention of color television.
Well, he was he was chief engineer, so he was the first one to roll out. CBS was the first company to roll out the version of a color a color television from the hypothetical blueprint to the actual machine, and my father had a lot to do with that rollout.
Okay.
Before that, he was in radio. We had microphones.
Right.
So so you like to take things apart, and so the basement was littered with skeletons of electronics. And here I am today, your favorite rabbi.
Yeah. So what? So you mainly I get this right? You mainly grew up like New York and Boston.
New York and Boston with a little detour in Rochester.
Right.
And then I came back to New York and New Jersey for my rabbinical studies.
Okay.
And then I've had a few gigs as a rabbi, and this is my third gig, and third is the charm. Lucky charm, and I've been here 14 years already. So
Wow.
It's not too shabby.
No, and you're also a phenomenal musician.
Oh boy, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I'd like to learn about that side of you as well. So when did you start playing music?
Oh, okay. Well, we had an out of tune piano growing up.
Okay.
I was like 2 years old, and I'd be banging on the keys, and I did that religiously for years, and I enjoyed that very much. And when I was 9, I took up the violin, and my parents suffered greatly through that phase, but I mastered that, and I was in orchestra, and my orchestra won the Massachusetts.
Mit Stageax, der schäumige Glänzer, schwenkt der Hub den Schmutz und Rain.
Hi, Isaac. It's been a while.
Yeah, how you doing, Rabbi?
Good.
Good, man, good.
But yes, we're talking about
My music.
your music.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I took private violin lessons, and I was in orchestra. And
How long did you do violin lessons?
I took violin lessons 6 years, something like that.
Okay.
And wasn't too bad, but it would have been, if I lived in the age of Google, whatever I was practicing, I could have easily heard what it was supposed to sound like.
Right.
But I wasn't able to do that, so I just imagined what it was supposed to sound like, which was often at great odds with the composer's vision. But anyway, but I love listening to music, and then I got into more Jewish music also, and that was a passion of mine as well. So.
And you played out eventually. You had your own bands, and you played under Rabbi Shlomo.
Yes,
Is that right?
yes.
Would you mind talking a little bit about that?
Oh, yes, that was great. So whenever I needed a quiet place to create a spiritual oasis, I would take the vinyl record, Shlomo's vinyl record, and I put it on the turntable, and I would go into another world of peace, love, and harmony, and serenity, and it's my like a happy place of it's soul music, and so I couldn't imagine that one day I would actually meet this composer.
Okay, so you had been listening to his records prior to
Oh
meeting
yeah.
him.
Oh, for years.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then I met him, and that was amazing. I didn't even realize he was actually a live person.
Okay.
And so I met him in '78 in Israel, and so we went out to his moshav that he had just founded, and it was absolutely bleak. Not a blade of grass was growing there. It was a converted military camp that they converted to a moshav for general civilian use between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. So I was there in the very, very beginning, and I was a guest of somebody's for Shabbat, and I got food poisoning. I guess the chicken was out a little too long, and so then it was another 7 years till I ran into him, and I was living up in the Boston area, and I heard he was giving a concert in Lowell, Massachusetts, so I went out there, and we clicked, and I played with him on stage, and then he called me, he said, come to New York when he's in town once a month, and I was going down once a month for the next 10 years, and really, it was a big influence, yeah, but deep musical influence, and the way he related to people, and I just thought it was amazing, his connection with people, and he really it's ironic because he would always relate to a person fully in the moment, but he would always say, "You're the best," but what he said, that you're the best to each person, like you're the best and you're the best, and it sounds funny that he would say the same thing to each person, and does he really mean it? But when he said it to you, you knew he was saying to you in that moment, and he felt it, that you were the best. So it doesn't make sense rationally, but on another level,
I think on another level it definitely makes sense, because it could be understood as that you are the best of being yourself.
Yes, and it's about being in the moment.
Right.
That's really what it was all about, being in the moment. He was just tuned in the moment. Speaking of tuned in, I ran into Timothy Leary.
Really?
I ran into him at a Whole Earth conference in 1990 in a hotel downtown Manhattan, and it kind of looked like him, and it had a big button that said Tim. And I said, "Are you Timothy Leary?" He said, "Yes." And I said, "Did you know my rabbi, Reb Shlomo?" I said, "Did I know him?" He said, "If I listened to his music before I took drugs, I never would have needed to take drugs." I said, "Wow, that's a heavy statement."
Yeah.
So the Timothy Leary told me that story. So because Shlomo was out in California back in the 60s, so they crossed paths many a time. So,
Wow.
apparently.
Wow.
Yeah, cool. Far out.
Oh yeah.
Far out, man.
Yeah.
Dude.
So what was it like? You joined his band.
Well, he didn't have what you call an official band. So
it was
whoever was around at the time that he was going to give a concert, he said, "What are you doing Saturday night? You're playing with me. Bring your violin, bring your mandolin, whatever instrument you played." So he'd have like a lot of people on the stage, and eventually, if you weren't good, you'd just be weeded out by natural selection. People would throw tomatoes at you. No, I'm just kidding. But I played with him about 300 concerts altogether.
Wow. Now, where were these concerts?
Well, I was part of his mostly his New York scene, because I'd be in the New York area once a month, because his father was running the shul when his father died. He had a twin brother, Eli Chaim Karlabach, and so his twin brother ran the shul three Shabbosim, 3 Sabbaths of the month, and once a month was reserved for his Shabbos that he took over, and all his followers would converge to be with him for that weekend, starting from Thursday through Sunday. It was like a monthly happening, and it was he'd have concerts almost booked throughout the weekend, and we'd go on the radio together and go to synagogues and play concerts or just impromptu gatherings and learnings, play music and study. Yeah, so he composed thousands of songs, but most of them came to him automatically over the Sabbath, where he couldn't write, because he was supposed to write. So if it was a good one, he'd sing it, and people would sing it, and they'd sing for like an hour until it was ingrained in their heads. And then after the Sabbath was over, if anybody remembered it, then they would tape it or compose it. But he couldn't read music, and he couldn't write music, but it was just in him. So he'd be talking, let's say, and in the middle of talking to you, it's like he was getting a signal from another.
He was channeling something.
He was channeling something.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's the word, Isaac. He was channeling, and suddenly he'd stop talking, and he'd start singing a melody, and he'd sing it, and then it would change a little, and anyway, so he had a full-blown, what we call the nigun. A nigun is a wordless melody, and that's Hebrew nigun. In Yiddish, it's nigun.
That's very cool.
A nigun, from the word melody in Hebrew. So in Hebrew, it's nigun. In Yiddish, it's nigun. Niggun.
Where were you guys? What venues were you guys playing in? Was it only synagogues, or were there other venues too?
No, radio stations.
Okay.
And synagogues and sometimes in the park, and sometimes in the dark, sometimes on a lark.
Yeah.
You never know.
Right. And what kind of vibe did those shows have to be playing in those groups when you're up there going?
You were in another zone. You were connected to the Almighty. You felt connected to the source of the divine. I can't put it any other way. You were plugged into the source of life. You were on a high joy frequency, a most high joy frequency. That's how I would put it. It's like take all the colors of the rainbow, put it in a blender, put it on ultra high, and add a few purple and violet tones, and you're in a different zone there. So.
No, that's amazing. And a lot of people don't get to feel that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of people identify the synagogue with a place to mourn one's dead relatives, and they come in, they say a few mournful words of the prayer for the dead, the Kaddish, and they come in and they're out, but they don't realize what a spiritually rich connection to the source of the divine is. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Barbasol, ihr darf dem Röschken safe nicht nehmen, schäft zerwiffen sich allein. Barbasol, Barbasol.
You talked about your father a little bit and his accomplishments. Tell me a little bit about your mother.
Oh, I'm glad you asked. Yeah, she was amazing. She had a wicked sense of humor. I mean, wicked. And so whatever sense of humor I have, I attribute all to her completely. And so not only did she have a great sense of humor, she was very intellectual, always reading a commentary magazine as fun literature, to relax. And she was a scholar. She was a Hebrew scholar. She had 2 college degrees, and she was born in 1921. So, in our generation, to not only have 1 but 2 college degrees,
right?
When most Jews didn't even go to college in those days because they only had a quota system. Only 5%. In a typical college, no more than 5% of the student body could be Jewish.
We're allowed to be.
We're allowed to be.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Very strict. Anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Would you believe?
Yeah.
After World War II, it eased up. By the '60s, it eased up already. But my brother Danny had to go to medical school in Brussels because his professor wouldn't write him he got straight A's, but his professor wouldn't write him a letter of recommendation for medical school. This is in the '60s in Cornell. So crazy. Yeah. So,
that is crazy.
And his freshman roommate at Cornell touched his head for horns, looking for horns. He never met a Jew before. So, I just say mine fell off before my bar mitzvah. So,
okay.
So, yeah. By the time of your bar mitzvah, they fall off.
Yeah, they're gone by then. Yeah, it's wild though, and I think a lot of folks, not to go into a darker conversation, but I think a lot of folks do forget or don't realize how much anti-Semitism there was.
Yeah, you couldn't be a Jewish homeowner in Buck Hill until 1956, maybe 57. Big ritzy, hoity-toity, millionaire community. Just no Jews.
Yeah.
And who are you, young man?
Who am I?
And introduce yourself.
Oh, well, it's not even. We introduced him.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay, just checking.
But yeah, and wasn't there at Shawnee too?
No dogs or Jews.
I think so.
Yeah, through the 50s. Yeah. So, ironically, the grandson of the owner was bar mitzvahed at Temple Israel.
Oh wow!
Because
Okay.
his son married one
very
nice lady. I won't say any names.
That's fine. It'd protect the innocent.
So yeah, my mom had 2 college degrees, and she always worked. She was teaching Hebrew school for decades and decades. So there'd be she'd teach in one place for many years, and they'd go through different principals every year.
Yeah.
But she was the mainstay. They'd all look to her for support and guidance. And a funny story, we were talking about Timothy Leary earlier, so I may as well throw this one in too.
Yeah.
So in 1969, we had just moved to Boston, to Lexington, Massachusetts, and Temple Amuna we were one of the founders of that synagogue. It's one of the great synagogues in America today.
Right.
So they had a very progressive Hebrew school in those days, and all the teachers were draft resistors during Vietnam, and they were graduate students from Brandeis. Well, anyway, so the principal tried to get my mother to take LSD, and she didn't. That wasn't her thing, and all the other teachers were trying to turn her on to hashish or marijuana, LSD. She refused, so she was the only one who wasn't on drugs in that Hebrew school. So, not that she was against it necessarily, but it just wasn't her thing.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's all I'm saying.
Must have been a prolific Hebrew school. Sounds like.
Well, let me
Sign
put
me
it.
up for that.
Let me put it this way: I went from in Rochester. My Hebrew school was memorizing intricate rules of grammar, and then I come to this very progressive Hebrew school where we'd have to meditate on the floor, and focus on relaxing our toes, going guided meditation.
Oh wow! Nice.
And then we draw pictures of the Godhead. So that was a very different kind of Hebrew school. So
Right.
very advanced for its very progressive.
Yes, sounds
very
like it.
progressive.
Yeah.
So So I got the best of both worlds.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So to jump back, you mentioned how melodies would just come to the rabbi.
Yeah.
Are you, forgive my ignorance on this, are you allowed to play instruments on Shabbat or no?
Well, in the olden days,
Okay.
we're talking before the Holy Temple was still standing.
Mm-hmm.
And in the olden days, they played music on this. They'd have 10,000 guitars and harps and flutes and cymbals and drums, and the Levites would be playing all the instruments. The Levites,
Okay.
and they'd have choral singers, and they'd be on the Temple Mount and the Har Habayit, we call it, and all of the city of Jerusalem would just be filled with music, with all the instruments and all the singing and all the incense burning, and this was like 24 hours all day, every day, and each day of the week would have different melodies. I mean, you know what day it is by listening to the tunes coming on. You know what time it is by listening to what songs are being sung. So
Right.
they didn't have church bells. They just had this was before all that. So this was anyway. So since the destruction of the temple by the Romans in the year 70.
Okay.
So because we're officially in mourning because the temple was destroyed, so we cut out all instruments on the Sabbath. So that's the side of the mourning. So and then there's the idea that if you break a string, you might be tempted to fix it. We're not supposed to repair things on the Sabbath. So
Okay.
now I can't see a drum being a problem. It's hard to break a drum unless you take like a sharp instrument and
You're trying.
So a drum and a tambourine, I'm more okay with, because that argument against fixing a reed or fixing a string, that wouldn't apply, because you might automatically fix a reed or fix a string, but a tambourine, there's nothing to fix, or a drum, there's nothing to fix. So so it's that's something that might be. So I'd like to bang on the table, so it's like a drum.
Right.
Yeah, polite banging, not too raucous,
Right.
within taste. Okay, so where were we?
The next thing we want to transition into here. So we talked about your music a little bit, which I want to get back to. But first, were you doing these shows with the rabbi as you were yourself becoming a rabbi?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, he wanted to, before I officially got my ordination through the yeshiva I was going to, he was ready to give me smicha, which is ordination. He was ready to, this was like 3 years before I actually got my smicha, because he died in 94, and I got my smicha actually 98, so this was like 4 years. I was in like a 7-8 year program, and so he felt I was ready on a soul level. Okay, he wasn't testing me on in terms of book knowledge, but he was looking at the soul level, and he said, I'm ready. But I told him, I unfortunately told him, let's wait till I officially get it, and then I'll get your bonus smicha. And I shouldn't have said that, because he died soon after that. You know?
Right.
And it was funny. So I was hanging out with Chabad Lubavitch Hasidim in the 80s. So I was gravitating in my spiritual search, and they're cool people and very friendly. And so I was living in one of their houses for a while, and as was my wont. And so I had a connection there, and so when the Rebbe died in 94. Okay, he came to me in a dream the night he died. That was June 12th, 1994. And that's the same day as the O.J. Simpson. So he came to me that night, and he said, follow me. And I was working at Temple Bethel of Rockaway Park as their ritual director that year while I was in rabbinical school. And so he was in my dream. He was in an ox-drawn cart, and he was beckoning me to jump onto the cart. So he said, "Follow me." Okay, and then I found out later that he died that night. Woo. And that's pretty wild, right? Okay. Yeah. And I tell young Hasidim today who weren't probably even born at that time, so I mean they can't believe that story, but it's a true story. Yeah. So I went to Shlomo, and I told him that story, and I said, the Rebbe said, follow me, and Shlomo said to me, don't follow him, follow me. And it's like, oh, it was like he was maybe jealous, and let me put it this: he never would tell anybody what to do. He always led by inspiration and emulation, but he never told anybody what to do. But that was the first time I ever heard him say anything to what you should do. He said, don't follow him, follow me. So I tucked that away. And then a few months later, he himself died. So, what do we know, you know?
Yeah. So are they both in different sects?
Well, actually, Shlomo started off as a non-Hasidic rabbinic family. Okay, you had two kinds of Jews. You had Hasidim and the opponents of the Hasidim. Okay. And my grandfather in Russia, he was one of the top opponents of Hasidim. So. Okay. So it was called the Misnagdim. The opposition. It means literally the opposition. So
were they a specific group, or was it just whoever wasn't Hasidim was?
Yeah, I mean you had general ideological kinship. So you had the Hasidim, which well, let me put it this way: the for hundreds of years the Misnagdim blazed a path of reaching God through scholarship, through study, through learning page by page of the holy texts. Okay, and of course, not everyone had the capacity to sit and learn and absorb intellectually and cerebrally, and so it wasn't for the masses. Okay, it cultivated an elite, a scholarly elite, and then you had the Baal Shem Tov came, who was the founder of Hasidim. In Hasidism, he was born in 1698, and he died in 1760. Pretty sure that's the dates. Yeah, I think that's it. And 1698 to 1750. And he started the Hasidic movement, which was very, very democratizing. showing people the path to God through joy, path to God through the individual mitzvah, and taking sublime joy in the act of performing the mitzvah. So learning was nice. Okay, it was never downgraded, but learning was one approach. But the individual mitzvah was filled with such cosmic potential to change the world that through one mitzvah that you do wholeheartedly, with your heart and soul, with intention, kavana, you can change the world. You can tip the scales in heaven. Okay, through that one mitzvah that you do with your heart and soul and mind, with pure concentration, you can affect the cosmos. Okay, and you can't serve God in sadness. You can only serve God in joy. And so, when people would be singing their hearts out and dancing their hearts out, and this was very revolutionary in the ranks of traditional Judaism. They were seen as like real disruptors, as we call, like Uber and things like that. Okay. They were the disruptors of their generation. Gotcha. Yeah. So, as with all disruptors, there are people who push back. So this Stagdim pushed back against that. So anyway, so Reb Shlomo grew up in this rabbinic world, and he came to America. He was escaping the Nazis. He was, I guess, he was in his teens when they left Europe and Germany, and I think it was Austria. Yeah. So he gravitated to different Hasidic groups that were in Brooklyn, and he heard all their singing and their melodies and their songs, and he was really moved by that. The Mojitzer and all sorts of different sects from Europe that were transplanted during, at the time of the war, and of course most Hasidic communities did not survive the war, but a few made it out in time, and they were able to survive, and some came after the war. And I'm not talking about Vietnam, I'm talking about World War II, just to make that clear. Okay. So he was in the yeshiva in Lakewood, and Rav Aaron Cutler, and he was the top student in their yeshiva, very misnagdish yeshiva of the opponents of the Hasidim. Anyway, he somehow stumbled into the Crown Heights, and the previous Rebbe, the Friedecker Rebbe, not the famous Menachem Mendel, the last of the seventh of the generation of the Lubavitchers, but his father-in-law was the Rebbe at that time, so he became Hasidic under his influence. Okay, and then he was sent out on to bring the message of Yiddishkeit to Judaism to college campuses. So he went out to college campuses and would gather groups together and try to turn them on to Judaism, because this was a very lost generation in terms of spirituality. We're talking the 1950s, so early 50s. So anyway, so Shlomo started singing songs. The songs were coming to him. He was composing new melodies, and he learned piano. He learned guitar. He couldn't read music still, but it just came to him naturally. So when the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the present one, came out, so Shlomo was starting. He started a house of love and prayer in San Francisco, in the Haight-Ashbury district, and the hate. He was preaching love in the middle of hate. Can you imagine? I never noticed. No, so he started a house of love and prayer. So it was a place of study and learning and teaching and singing and joy, and people could just hang out and find a room and sleep in, and then wake up and learn Torah and sing songs and learn Torah, and it was a great center of revival. And Shlomo he went out to the pop festivals out there, and Berkeley Folk Festival, so he was invited out there.
Wow.
One of the organizers' family members was living, I think, in Miami, and he was visiting in Miami. And anyway, so she was playing his music out the window, and one of the relatives of the organizers heard the music singing, and who is that singing? And she made the connection. So I got to have this person over at the concert, so they invited him that way. So anyway, he had lots of followers that came. He said, "Everybody's here. Come with me. We'll go to the rabbi's house, the local rabbi's house for Shabbos." 500 people followed him.
Wow.
Because there was such a yearning for spirituality,
Right.
and most, I would say, a third of the hippies were Jewish, at least a third, and easily, and so there was, and they were not exposed to anything of his nature at all. I mean, they were used to suburban synagogues where you would go to somebody's bar mitzvah and then you'd have a piece of sponge cake afterwards and go home.
And that was it.
That was it. So that was Judaism.
Do you feel like there was a reason why a third of the hippies were Jews? Do you think that was that an accident, or do you not think so?
It was not an accident. No. There's something in the Jewish soul that aspires to connecting with God, and they're not quite sure how to get there, but whatever they were exposed to wasn't working for them.
Right.
So they were trying out ashrams and all sorts of exotic alternatives, but the last thing they wanted to try was Judaism, because they thought they had experienced what Judaism was, the suburban destination center, and it didn't. Okay, it had its functions, but it wasn't really a place where you would. It wasn't. It didn't touch you on the soul level. It was a place of nostalgia and memories more than anything else. So. Nothing wrong with nostalgia and memories.
Right.
I'm not knocking that.
Yeah.
I love nostalgia and memories. I'm one of the first ones to tell you how important it is, but there's still more. And he was able to touch the neshamas, touch the souls of these young people, and they gravitated. They saw something authentic about his way of bringing that across. So they followed it, and So, and there's obviously this spirituality in other people too. But but in the Jewish soul, there's definitely a yearning to connect with God. Isn't that right, Isaac?
Oh, I concur.
Yeah.
So, during this time of your, we started here talking about when you were doing your rabbinical training, and you were playing with Rabbi Shlomo at the same time?
Yes, all through that time. Yes, and I also had a klezmer band that I put together to play klezmer music.
Okay.
And I have a wild story to tell you about that. So I had these great people I played with. Lenny and his father Jan. They were from the Ukraine. So I met them when they came off the boat in the late '90s, and so we had a nice wedding band. And so while I was at rabbinical school, so I was self-funding my studies a little bit, not too much, just a little bit. So I had ads in the local Jewish paper in New York. So one guy calls me, head of Sound City. I don't know if it's still in business or whatever, but they sold, I guess, music equipment, Sound City. And so he called me. He was getting married, so I came down to Manhattan and I signed the contract. And he said, you should really check your answering machine. We had answering machines in those days, the early 90s.
Right.
He said, you should check your answer. I said, why? He's all right, well, let's backtrack one moment, and then we'll come back to that.
Okay.
So I was... so I had a sense of humor that didn't quite jive with my fellow students.
Okay.
So for some reason I blurted out, and we say the divine presence hovers over people who study Torah together.
Right.
So I guess the divine presence heard my joke. So I said, imagine if Hitler never changed his name, because he was born Schicklgruber.
Okay.
Adolf Schicklgruber. May his memory be wiped out. Okay. So instead of shouting out Heil Hitler, they would all shout out Heil Schickelgruber. Wouldn't that be crazy?
It would be. It sounds like a Mel Brooks movie. Almost.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was in the early afternoon.
Okay.
2 hours later, I'm going down to meet this fellow from the Sound City to sign him up for the wedding that he wanted me to do. It was music. And he said, on my way out, he said, you should really check your answer machine. I said, why? He said, it seemed to be malfunctioning. I said, what do you mean? He said, I called your number, and it was on speed dial, so every time I redialed it, it was the same number. I didn't make a mistake. The first time I called, instead of your voice, it was Adolf Hitler giving a speech. And then one of his famous speeches.
Right.
With the crowds cheering and everything.
Yeah.
And so he hung up and he dialed it again, and he got that again.
Jeez.
I know, right? Wow. Then the third time he gets my voice. He says, please leave a message. I said, and I got such a chill when he told me that, because I knew that just a few hours earlier I had made that crazy joke.
Right.
You know? So evil is a real thing. I'm convinced. There's good and there's evil. And I touched... you don't mess with evil, and
right.
So there was a message there, and I'm still digesting and processing. Yeah.
So did you get any explanation or closure into how that happened?
All I say is, what do we know?
Yeah.
That's my answer. What do we know? Because it can't be explained electronically, but the cosmic forces can control any electronics. It's not beyond them.
Right.
So.
Wow, that is a wild story.
I still get chills telling you.
Yeah, man. So we'll jump back to your klezmer band.
Yeah.
So what kind of gigs did that band play?
Oh, well, we played a lot of good weddings. I mean, my friend Lenny, he's a professional violinist. He was only 15 when he came here, but his father, they grew up in the Soviet Union, in Kiev at the time. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. And there was nothing to do for fun in Russia, the Soviet Union. So his father made him practice 6 hours a day, and he became an amazing musician. I mean, just 6 hours a day playing this high-level music, and he was just, since he was a little boy. So, and I guess I found him off the boat, so I befriended him, and so I said, why don't you play music with me? So how did I know? Little did I know that I was working with a child prodigy here. And his father played the bayan, which is an accordion with buttons.
Okay.
Jan, his father's name was Jan on the bayan.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a little talented group, and then I had my mandolin, and I was singing a little Yiddish and playing the mandolin, and then Lenny was on violin, his father was on accordion and bayan, and just amazing music. And they played all these classical pieces. It was it blew me away. And so anybody who listened to an audition, they would just they signed us up right away. So it was amazing. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool. Yeah, I believe that I seen some video. If it's the same band.
Mm-hmm. Could be.
Yeah, there's
there was
some
a young dude with a violin. Yeah, I do remember.
Floating around in the YouTube universe.
Yes. Yeah.
But it sounded great.
Yeah.
It did. And I'm sure everybody enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
So, what, in a nutshell, because most people don't know, and I'm curious too, what exactly does rabbinical school entail? Like, it's very far, for anybody who's probably hasn't been there, it's foreign. Yeah.
So, I was ordained. I got my smicha in '98, so that's 23. I guess do the math. So, 23 years. Yeah.
That's 22,
this
23
June.
years. Yeah.
This week.
Yeah.
This week. Parshas Bamidbar. I got that Sunday of this week's Parsha of the Torah. Bamidbar in the wilderness. They were sending us out into the wilderness. The wilderness of the Poconos.
Right.
So, yeah. Anyway, it's a lot of you study and you learn, and my school I was blessed with very small classes, very superlative, knowledgeable teachers and very small classes of 3-4 people. So you had to do your homework. You couldn't hide.
Right.
But if you had 20 people in a room, you could hide maybe.
Yeah.
But you can't do it with 3 or 4.
Right.
So it was for 7, 8 years. So. So we covered a lot of Talmud and commentaries and the Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, and all the commentaries and the codes of Jewish law and the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Brura, all these commentaries upon commentaries, till your head could spin a little bit. And pastoral counseling, and I did an internship with attaching myself to a rabbi who was doing pastoral work, and accompany him to his prisons and nursing homes and places where he'd be with people and offer counseling. And that proved useful to me when I would visit people in the prison, because I got a lot of calls from the prison chaplain saying this guy claims to be Jewish. He didn't have a Jewish name and he didn't look too Jewish, but he wanted Jewish food. The kosher food was better, so
Right.
a lot of people claimed to be Jewish, he wanted to weed them out. But it turned out if their mother was Jewish, then technically they were Jewish, even if they didn't have a Jewish sounding name. And so I would have to explain that you're born Jewish through your mother being Jewish, or you convert to Judaism. So it's possible that you might not have a Jewish name and be Jewish. I have a great story to tell you. One of the great opportunities of being here is there's some good stories. So I had one call from a lady whose mother was dying, and she was in her 90s, and all of a sudden she started speaking Yiddish on her deathbed. And she wasn't 100% sure what Yiddish was, but it sounded like it was something Jewish.
Right.
And so, said, Rabbi, please come out to our farm. That's in Cherry Valley. Yeah.
Okay.
Something like that. Yeah, one of those valleys. Cherry.
Lehigh.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Hidden Valley.
Yeah, a lot of valleys. Yeah. So I went out to the valley, to the farmhouse, and so the mother's speaking Yiddish. Turns out that when she was a little girl, back in the early 1900s, she fell in love with a non-Jewish man, and in those days, you couldn't fit in anywhere if you were intermarried. So,
right.
It wasn't necessarily that she was trying to leave her faith. She fell in love, and she couldn't. There was no home for that scenario to take root, and also for his community.
Right.
So they came out to the Poconos to escape to where nobody knew them, and they just created a new identity for themselves. So they just became, I guess, Americans.
Right.
But they didn't go to any official churches or synagogue. They just lived, and they raised 5 daughters.
Wow. Okay.
So all their daughters were Jewish, technically.
Yeah.
They didn't know it.
Right.
And they had children. So surrounding this old lady speaking Yiddish is like 25 people in this room. And I said, guess what? You're all Jewish. And you could hear all their jaws drop. Can you imagine such a... I happen to have an extra spare mezuzah in the glove compartment of my car. I said, let me run out and put a mezuzah on your door. Would that be okay? They said, sure. So that's quite a story.
Yeah.
And, I live for those stories. Yeah.
So what is the reasoning of it being passed through the mother?
Well, you always know who the mother is. That's really the reason.
Okay.
But this radical change came at the time of the Babylonian exile, the destruction of the first temple in 586 BCE, before the Common Era. Okay. Now, if you were living at the time of 586 BCE, they ask you what year it is, you wouldn't say it's 586 BCE.
Right. Right.
You'd say it's the 7th year in the reign of such and such a king.
Yeah.
That's how they counted time.
Yeah.
You give me the name of a king and what year his reign is. That's the year it is. Okay. If you're talking about the past, you talk about the other king and what year it was in his reign.
Right.
Or it's the 2nd year of King Shmo, and that's the year. Okay. So it wasn't very scholarly or academic. That's just how they kept time.
Right.
Pretty much. So anyway, in 586 BCE, the destruction of the first temple, and then we had the exile to Babylonia. Before the exile, Jews lived in a Jewish milieu, all Jewish all the time. All Jewish all the time. And you knew who you were. You go out of the street, no matter who your father or mother was, you knew you were Jewish by just the street signs. Everything was in Hebrew, and all the signs on the stores were in Hebrew, and the smells were Jewish. So you were surrounded completely by Jewish culture reflected back at you. But now you're exiled to a new land where it's a melting pot society, and you have 100 different ethnic groups living in a city, and suddenly you walk out of your house, you don't know who you are.
Right.
So it's and your father's working all day, comes home late at night and goes to sleep and starts the next day working again. So the person who most affects you in your value system and upbringing is your mother. So the fact that you always knew who your mother was, and the fact that the mother was the primary influence on your life and your values. Okay, it's good to know who your father is, but the one who affects you the most in your personality and values is your mother.
Yeah.
God bless the mothers. That was just Mother's Day a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
So God bless the mothers. Yes. So that's the reason. So that's at that point. The rabbis got together and they said, okay, up until now, you could be Jewish through your father, but now we're in a situation. We have to do something radical to save the situation. So, and of course, when Jews came, when King Cyrus of Persia conquered the Babylonians and allowed the Jewish people to return to the homeland and rebuild, so they had to set down parameters of Jewish identity to really, if they wanted to save the people and save the religion. It's the religion that would inspire the people to have their unique identity. So they had to take radical steps to ensure that the religion would continue with fervor and fire and desire. Yeah. So that's the background of that change. So about 2,500 years ago, went from a father base to mother base. Okay. So now there's some stirrings of changing that a little bit, but that's basically the story of the last 2,500 years.
Okay.
Give or take a few centuries. Yeah.
No, I didn't. Now I know.
Yeah.
Now I know.
Well, this has been fascinating.
Yeah. So, as a rabbi and as a musician, what do you feel, or how has it affected you, the connection between how close music is with Judaism? It seems to be hand in hand.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome question. Well, how many notes are there in the musical scale, Al?
I don't know
if it's not infinite, there's 12 equal parts, right?
Yeah.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Yep.
How many is that?
That's 8.
Do, re, mi, fa,
Yeah,
sol,
8.
la, ti, do. Okay, so
That's what we all sing.
right. So a Jewish boy is circumcised on the 8th day.
Okay.
So it's you lived a life in one dimension, and then you're connected to the covenant. Okay, you have 1 week in one reality. So we go one day beyond. We're touching into the next a higher reality, So, so the Shabbat. This is the holiest day of the year. It's the 7th day.
Right.
And so there's a connection to the divine. We have 7 continents, seven dwarfs, 7 seas. Okay, so 7 is a holy number. So, so the Jewish people believe in one God. We embraced the Sabbath day, and there's a story that all the days of the week got together. Sunday's on the phone for Monday. Tuesday's on the phone for Wednesday. See, you almost fell for that. Yeah. Okay. So all the days of the week had a partner, and but Saturday was left out. It was like the odd number. Sunday was with Monday, Tuesdays with Wednesday, Thursdays with Friday. Who's going to be for Saturday? So Shabbos complains to the Holy One, blessed be He, and says, I'm a little lonely here. He says, don't worry. I have a people for you. It's like God is the great matchmaker. One day there will be a people who will be the Sabbath people, the Shabbos people. They will be your people. You will be their day, and they will be your people. So there's a story that Achad Ha'am, that's the pen name of a famous writer, and he said, more than the Jews have kept the Sabbath has kept the Jews. So it's through keeping Shabbat as the holiest day, as making Shabbat special, making it sacred, making it different from all the days of the week, living your life revolving around the Sabbath, that preserved Jews and Judaism throughout thousands of years of wandering the face of the earth. That was our center. And without that, who knows, we would have been lost in the great mix. The great mix. So that's the story. Yes. Shabbos.
So the connection between Judaism and music probably goes back to the beginning.
Yeah. So, in the temple, as I was saying earlier in the podcast, that the temple was filled with singing. The Levites were singers and musicians, and so it was more than just the sacrificing animals and and lighting the lamps. Okay. Anywhere in Jerusalem, you could hear the singing. And you could hear the music, and it would just transport you into another realm. So you really felt close to God. Not only did you feel close to God because Jerusalem being on like a very hilly, high level, and the clouds were low, so you could feel you could, touch the sky, as Jimmy said. Okay, so excuse me while I touch the sky.
Yeah.
So not only would you be able to almost touch the clouds, but you would hear this music that would transport you into a very high place.
Wow.
So yeah. And actually, one of the first cases of music is Miriam dancing with all the women at the crossing of the Red Sea after the miraculous salvation at the sea. So she was leading all the women with the cymbals and timbrels and dance. So that was really the first recorded case of Jewish music. It just came to me right now.
Wow.
So thank you for asking that.
No.
Cool.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And that was about how old again?
That was about 3,500 years ago.
Okay.
Give or take a few hundred years.
That's a good bit of time.
The mists of history.
Mm-hmm.
The early mists.
When did they get away from sacrificing?
Well, I guess when the temple was destroyed. So
Okay.
Now, having said that, there was the synagogue concept started parallel to the time when the temple was still in existence. So the temple was centrally based in Jerusalem, but you had Jews living throughout Israel, and you had Jews in diaspora communities in Alexandria, Egypt, and in Turkey, Asia Minor, and in Babylonia, and all sorts of towns in the Levant, and so they would create places of studying Torah and worship. Mm-hmm. So it would be based around this singing of psalms and some other ancient prayers and studying texts. So a synagogue was a place of prayer and a place of study, a beit tefillah and a beit midrash, house of study and a house of prayer. And Isaiah says, my temple will be a house of prayer for all peoples. All peoples. So so when the temple was destroyed in the year 70, so by default we had the synagogue left as the model. And so in Christianity and Islam, they based their church and the mosque patterned after this place of the model of Jewish worship. That was the synagogue. Synagogue is a Greek word meaning place of assembly.
Okay.
The word's like a synapse It's a connection, place of connection, connecting the neurons, the synapses. Is it synapse or synapse? Tomato or tomato? So
I think it is with a SI and
SY and
SY, yeah.
like synagogue, right? It's Greek. It's a Greek prefix.
Sign,
So it means like a connection, people coming together. So synagogue is people coming together, place of gathering.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Yeah. Well, this has been fun, Al.
Yes, Rabbi. I really appreciate you coming on and doing this and giving us some of your time tonight.
I've enjoyed
hear
it.
what you have to
I've
say.
enjoyed it immensely.
Great. I'm glad I enjoyed having you here.
Thanks for the opportunity, Al.
Definitely.
All right.
Anytime.
All right.
Thank you all for listening to this episode of the Planet Shivers podcast. It was wonderful to have the rabbi on and talk to him about music and Judaism. I got a lot from this episode. I hope you did too. The rabbi also has a brand new YouTube channel. You can find it, Rabbi Baruch Binyamin Melman. I will put the link underneath. You could find Isaac's work on Instagram at when_in_zen. And of course, you could find my latest stuff on Instagram at Albert Shivers, on Facebook, Albert Shivers, and you could jump on my Patreon page, Albert Shivers Artist. Next week on the podcast, lead singer of the new and exciting band Rubik's Cube, Vanessa Marciano, comes on the show to talk all sorts of music things, conspiracies, underground tunnels. We cover all kinds of things. Also, I just want to thank everyone who's ever been on the show. We've reached 60, and I'm going to tell you what, folks, I have my eye on 100. I could smell it. I could see it ahead of me. So it's going to be a fun ride from here to there. In the meantime, take care of yourself and take care of somebody else, and I'll talk to you soon.